So the other day I went to the Metropolitan Museum in New York and I thought, I'll just have a little look at the musical instrument collection. I didn't know much about it. When I went there, I realized it actually has one of the most comprehensive collections of older instruments in the world, and almost shows the whole history of bowed stringed instruments. Like, you can visually see it, and I thought it was so interesting. I'm actually going to go back there today to talk you through it and show you the amazing instruments at the museum. But first I have to get a coffee. The museum is located in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, right near Central Park. So it's actually quite accessible, probably a lot more accessible than the Violin Museum in Cremona, which mostly shows stringed instruments of the violin family. Getting really close now. Here we are. This is such a massive museum. They pretty much have anything from ancient Egyptian artifacts to ancient Rome to the Renaissance, Chinese artifacts to old art and more modern art. And there's even a huge collection of Impressionist art. But I'm basically making my way straight to the musical instrument collection because it is truly amazing. That's if I can find my way there. Okay, I'm definitely getting close now. Oh look, there's a Strad. But the main part of the musical instrument exhibition is through these doors. Can you believe that this musical instrument exhibition actually took up 10% of the entire Met when it was first opened? Now there's multiple Strads here, Amati instruments and other instruments. But what actually made this entire collection possible was the enthusiasm of this lady. So Mary Elizabeth Adams Brown was a huge collector of musical instruments. Originally, she just bought a few curious instruments for her son, who sketched them. Then she got into collecting more, and she realized the significance of actually working out the history of musical instruments and how they fitted into culture. Her collection ended up having over 3,500 instruments, and she basically donated the entirety of her collection to the Met Museum. This is the oldest piano in existence. It was built by Bartolomeo Cristofori, and it's the first piano with a hammer key. It was called a piano forte. But I think this is actually a really good opportunity for me to go into the history of the violin, because in this museum the artifacts basically trace the entire history of bowed stringed instruments. So for that I'm going to go into the other gallery. Here we are. So this is the other section of the gallery, and here we have a lot of Asian, African and Eastern European instruments. And that's really where you can trace the origins of bowed instruments. So some of the most simple and oldest bowed instruments actually were found in India and other parts of Asia like Mongolia. And this cabinet especially, there's a bit of a chronological history of bowed stringed instruments. So I believe that some of the earliest bowed and stringed instruments were very rudimentary. They would have been an instrument with maybe one string and then they would have been bowed using bows with horsehair. These instruments could have been coconuts with maybe some kind of vellum cover and a simple bow, and there was lots of variations. You see them in Mongolia, China, India, ancient India, and it's very hard to actually pinpoint exactly when and where these instruments were made. There is definitely records of instruments from BC, like over 2,000 years ago, like bowed stringed instruments. The problem is that they were made out of organic material which tends to decompose after a few years. So the actual proof, like the ancient instruments, will no longer exist, and only their stories and drawings will exist either in writings or even on stone carvings and things like that. And these instruments would also sometimes be plucked instead of bowed, creating quite a different sound. Then around sort of the 1200s, 1300s, an amazing instrument appeared in Mongolia, and that's the Murin Kur, which looks a bit like this instrument here. And these simple stringed instruments spread throughout the whole of Asia, even into the Middle East. In the Middle East, they started combining an instrument which was called something like the lute, and combined that with bowing, so created something quite interesting and different. The instrument is the Rabab, and a similar instrument was even used by the Sufis a long time ago in meditation. This Rabab was built in Algeria in the early 1900s, but they have actually been around for many hundreds of years, close to 1,000 years. So here's another instrument that's similar. A lot of the lutes around that time were starting to get a little bit more of like an egg shape, but obviously that was a problem for the bow, because it would be very difficult to run the bow along the middle without bumping into the edges. But then in places like Spain, they started creating instruments that had a smaller waist like these types of old guitars. So in the sort of late Middle Ages, around like early Renaissance, there were also instruments in Europe called the Rebec. So the Rebec had 3 strings, and the music began to sound a lot more like the Western stringed music that we know today, probably a lot more folky. This painting is called The Musician, from the early 1600s. They also have some other early stringed instruments here, like the kamancha, which is a type of spike fiddle. And here's a spike fiddle from Thailand. But with the guitar, these other instruments started developing, like the viola da gamba. And then very soon afterwards, the first violins started appearing somewhere around Italy. There was a lot of German lute makers at the time as well. They don't exactly know who made the first violin. One of the very earliest violins that's still in existence is here at the Met. And it is a violin made by Andrea Amati in 1559. So I think the oldest violin in existence is from the 1550s. So this is very close to one of the first violins in its modern shape. It was commissioned by the Spanish royal family in the mid-1500s, and it is one of an orchestra of about 20 instruments that he commissioned Amati to make. And the inscription on the side is interesting. By this bulwark alone, religion stands and will stand. And it was made during the time of the Protestant Revolution in Europe, and the King of Spain and France had united into a huge Catholic kingdom, wanting to exert the importance of Catholicism. They wanted to kind of put themselves above the Protestants, with these intricate instruments. But it is these early instruments that probably made the violin a big instrument all throughout Europe. It was probably this act alone that cemented the violin family as the preferred bowed-stringed instrument throughout Europe, and eventually led to it also being used in folk music and throughout the whole world. So here are just a few more instruments that are really worth seeing while you're in this museum. There's a violin here by Nicolo Amati, the grandson of Andrea Amati, and it's actually still with the original kind of setup, so with the old fingerboard and bridge. To me it looks like that top plate has had a very rough life. There's also a cello by the brothers Amati, and a very old viola by Andrea Amati. Then there are a total of 4 Stradivarius violins in this museum. One is out at the moment. It's being researched by Sam Sigmundovitz here in Brooklyn. The other 3 are still here. I showed you the first one as we were walking in, and here are another 2. So this one here is an earlier one from 1693, when Stradivarius was 49 years old. It still has the Baroque setup. And then there is one from the Golden Period, which from 1711. And then, of course, there's the Piatigorsky Stradivarius cello from 1714. Piatigorsky was one of the greatest cellists that ever lived, so very inspiring. It looks like that side of the cello had a bit of wear and tear, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of that dirt on the hand patch was directly from Piatigorsky's hand. There's also an interesting cello by William Foster, who worked in London. This cello is from 1782. This cello is called the Royal George. It was made for George Frederick, Prince of Wales. And there's a violin by Joachim Thielke. What's extraordinary about this violin is that it was made in the same city where my father had his workshop in the 1960s, just 280 years earlier, from about 1685. And then there are a few other curiosities here, some quite interesting instruments. So here is an Italian viola d'amore, a silent fiddle, a couple of hardanger fiddles, and here are some pochettes, which are just so cute. You can just about put them into your pocket. And then of course there's the Hurdy, which is also in a way bowed, but it's like a little wheel. So some other curious bowed stringed instruments that they have here, a couple of different fiddles from a Stradivari that they created for the radio. Here's one of the first electric violins in existence from 1938, a Rickenbacker. And here is another electric violin from the 1930s. Now, stringed instruments aren't the only thing on display here at this amazing musical instruments section of the Met Museum. They actually have a Theremin, which is one of the earliest synthesizers, and such a great number of other curious instruments. It is probably one of the most comprehensive collections of instruments all up, but also stringed instruments that I've been to. So I hope this video gave you a really good overview of the beautiful musical instrument collection at the Met Museum of New York. Now, a lot of my subscribers are from the US and Canada, so it would be a lot easier for you to get there than some of the European museums. Also, I hope this video gives you a good overview over the history of the violin and the bowed stringed instruments. So if you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe and hit the little bell so you find out every time I post a new video, and most importantly, keep making beautiful music. See you guys next time. Bye.